So first, I'll explain what my Students in Medicine Mentorship Program is really about. So I founded this program about 2 years ago during COVID-19, and its mission is to help provide mentorship and guidance to other students to help them pursue their dreams in the healthcare professions. And I really created this program for like 3 purposes. One being, I noticed that there's going to be a shortage of healthcare professionals in the future. Like by 2030, there's going to be a shortage of 15 million healthcare workers. There's also a lack of diversity in the healthcare field. But also during COVID-19, a lot of students were approaching me and asking how they could be involved in medicine because they didn't really have any family who were in the medical fields that could really guide them. So really what I'm trying to do is to help connect mentors with mentees to help guide them along the way. So my first exposure to the metaverse was through my university that I'm going to be attending this fall, Case Western Reserve University. And they're using it to teach their medical students anatomy. And I thought this was pretty cool, so I'll show a short video about it.
That this is new. No one has ever done anything like it before. Each lobar bronchi or secondary bronchi subdivides into 5 bronchopulmonary segments in each of the lower lobes. Now these bronchopulmonary segments are the smallest functional.
So I thought that it's just amazing to offer that students could really transport themselves into this world where they can just virtually explore like the human body, and really got me thinking about what the potential of metaverse in medicine. So I guess the first question that we probably all have is, what is the metaverse? And we also have a short video to explain that as well.
What actually is the metaverse? Well, if we think of the internet as something that we look at, the metaverse is a version of the internet that we're inside. The idea is that we will experience the metaverse as an avatar, a virtual version of ourselves that we control as we explore this new online frontier. But what will we actually do? Okay, so Boz, here we are in what might be considered a representation of what the metaverse could be.
Yeah, for us, the metaverse is a spatial construct, as opposed to the previous web, which was really a very linear kind of 2D flat thing. We want this one to be immersive. Now, of course, it doesn't mean it has to be virtual reality. It could also just be on a phone or on a desktop computer.
You might have noticed that we're using the tools of the metaverse to create a good portion of this item. My avatar has been created by a couple of companies ready.
So that just kind of explains what the metaverse is, using virtual, augmented, and mixed reality technology. And it's just so amazing that this type of technology can really open up a kind of a new world. And really, there's so many possibilities with it.
What actually is?
All right, so I'm going to introduce our speakers. First and foremost, thank you for all of our speakers for being here today. We really appreciate you all taking the time out. So I'm just going to introduce each one. So first we have our keynote speaker, Dr. Rohan Jotwani, and then we have our 2 panelists, Dr. Abbas Hyderi and Mr. Osman, who will be taking questions at the end, as well as providing any more information that they have on the metaverse and their respective fields. So just a little bit more information about our keynote speaker, Dr. Rohan Jotwani. He is currently a pain medicine fellow, and he's been doing his fellowship at Harvard Brigham and Women's Hospital. And he is actually a pioneer in metaverse and medicine. So he completed his bachelor's in biology at Columbia University, his MD MBA at Tufts University School of Medicine, his residency in anesthesiology at New York Presbyterian and Weill Cornell Medical College, and fellowship at Harvard Brigham and Women's Hospital. He'll soon be starting as an attending physician at the Weill Cornell Medical College and Cornell Tech. And so he's been using the metaverse, and he's going to give a short presentation, like 25 minutes, about how he's been using the metaverse and how, like, any more information he has on that. And then we have our first panelist, Dr. Abbas Hyderi. So he is the Senior Associate Dean of Medical Education and Professor of Clinical Science at Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine. He completed his bachelor's at cum laude at Harvard University. He completed his MD at the University of Illinois at Chicago College of Medicine. He completed his MPH at Portland State University, his residency in family medicine at Oregon Health and Science University, and he was the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Medical Education and worked at UIC and was there for over 12 years. And yeah, like I said, now he's a Senior Associate Dean of Medical Education at Kaiser, and he will be talking about how the metaverse, what the metaverse's role is in medical school education. And then we have our third panelist, Mr. Osman Khan. And he completed his BA in Industrial Management at Purdue University. He has a Master of Management and Hospitality from Cornell Peter and Stephanie Nolan School of Hotel Administration. He completed his MBA at Cornell Johnson Graduate School of Management, was previously at Accenture and with MGM Resorts, and is now the Senior Manager with PricewaterhouseCoopers Intelligence Practice. He analyzes emerging technology trends, including the metaverse, for PwC's international corporate strategy. Previously, he worked with Accenture and with MGM Resorts, where his former team launched the first non-fungible token NFT in Las Vegas. He lives in Chicago with his family and enjoys mentoring students on the art of storytelling for college admissions. So I'm really proud to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Rohan Jotwani. Thank you for being here. You can take it away whenever.
Thank you so much, Syra and Amani, for what is a very, very generous and kind introduction. Thank you so much for going through those definitions and giving us some really great examples of what folks are already doing in the space. So really my goal for our talk today is just to tell you a little bit about how I've entered into this, I guess, this metaverse over the past couple of months, what we've been exploring and kind of doing from my end, where we kind of see it going. I don't really have slides, and I really want this to be kind of an open discussion, because we are sort of treading into something where, to be honest, there's not really a ton of research that's been done. And so I don't really have slides of, research to present, because no one's really done anything so far in the space. We know that this concept of what we call extended reality, which includes virtual reality and augmented reality, has been something that's really been central to medicine for decades now. So, if you look at various kinds of medical and clinical training, folks have been exploring, things from creating, fake patient models, all the way to, various now what we're doing with the virtual reality goggles, right? Creating spaces to explore anatomy. But, the world of medical simulation goes back for decades and decades and decades. And this new technology is kind of a new iteration of simulation technology. At least that's the way that I'm using it. So my day-to-day job is a pain fellow here in Boston. I see patients who live with a lot of chronic pain. And a part of what got me interested in it is that in the world of chronic pain, we do a lot of procedures. And these are a lot of procedures that were new to me at the start of my fellowship. These are not procedures that we really do. Before I was a pain fellow, I was an anesthesia resident. And as an anesthesia resident, you don't get too much exposure to like the world of chronic pain, right? Most of our lives are lived in doing general anesthesia. And then we get a few months to do the kind of subspecialties to decide if we want to pursue them further as a fellowship. I decided I wanted to do chronic pain because I really like the idea of, having this kind of duality to my practice. One form of my practice being, as an anesthesiologist that worked in operating rooms, that met patients on the day of surgery and kind of lived with them through that surgical experience. And then another side of my training, which I wanted to be focused on, I guess what you could call what we think of as like the more traditional doctor experience, right? You meet a doctor and you keep on meeting them over and over and over again for many years and years and years. And I thought being able to do both with a career would be really exciting and interesting. What's a little harder to know though is when you start your fellowship, and on day one, you're just like exploring this like vastness of procedural overload. So chronic pain doctors can really pick any named nerve in the human body and then have to anesthetize it, right? They do a lot of things, under X-ray, which is not a really common modality used by anesthesiologists otherwise. So with X-rays, I sort of learned a lot about ultrasound during my residency. So if you were to give me an ultrasound and help me find a target in the human body, I could probably reach it with a needle with very, very good accuracy, right? I'd done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ultrasound guided procedures, as a resident. But the first day of my fellowship, there was an entirely new tool to use, right? And I wasn't really good at it because I'd never done really that much of it before I'd showed up. But here I was on day one of fellowship and people were just like, go, and that's really, unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of what medical training is, right? We even have this motto where we say like see one, do one, teach one, which would mean, theoretically, if you're seeing patients every 30 minutes, then within an hour and a half, you should be able to teach, which doesn't make a ton of sense. And so I really came upon, quote, the metaverse as really a tool for myself. So I remember thinking to myself, like there are a lot of procedures that we do, very complex procedures and very odd parts of the human body that we don't really do that often. And, I would look at the procedure list that we were doing for the next day. I would go back to the textbooks and I'd try and think in my mind, like, oh, how will I do this procedure tomorrow? I'd look at the patient's imaging if they had a CT or an MRI, and I'd try and like plan out the trajectory with the needle. I'd think about angles, and I'd read what other people had done in 2D images. But it just wasn't a very good experience. I'd still show up on the day of, and it wasn't quite as smooth as I wanted it to be. And then back in my mind, I was like, man, you know what I really need? I would love to have this like way to practice the exact procedure I would love to do tomorrow, but do it the night before and just do it over and over and over again. And, at that time, like really nobody had told me like, oh, this was like a possibility. I remember just Googling like, just like, is there like some 3D anatomy thing? And then I saw something very similar to what you were showing with the HoloLens. That if you have this headset, you can maybe create a virtual reality space with very complex models. So I invested, personally my money into buying an Oculus headset. And then I noticed that there was this anatomy software out there. And like the coolest thing was this anatomy software, which normally is like very expensive, has like some free models. And the free models just happen to be of the human spine. And the procedures I do most often are on the spine. And so I start practicing. And like the first day goes by, I show up to work, and the next day I just feel better about the procedure. Like I can angulate and create trajectories with the controllers that mirror very closely to what we're doing in the clinic. And then I start to test it for like even more complex procedures, procedures involving, very small nerves in the face, procedures involving very complex movements of the machine. And then suddenly I start to realize like, wow, I like, however long, like maybe, the average fellows takes around 10 to 15 X procedures to get good at something, but I was getting good at it very quickly. Like I was getting good at it within 2 or 3. I was like feeling very confident. And then I was starting to be like, oh, like now I understand the difference between 15 degrees moved cephalad versus 10 degrees moved cephalad, because I kept on doing it over and over and over in virtual reality. Which brought me to my next idea, right? Which is, you know, a lot of times as a fellow, I will be tasked with working with a resident who, like myself, has never done these procedures before, right? And unlike me, they're not doing a whole year of it, they're doing like 1 month of it. So their ability to get good at it is even less than my time that I have to get good at it. And so one day, you know, we were doing this, you know, what we call a neurotomy procedure, where instead of, you know, we find a nerve of the human body and we burn the nerve with a needle. And so you need to be really, really precise, right? Like you actually, this is one of those, you know, instances where like you cannot be too precise about something. And so you know, I texted the resident the night before and I was like, hey, we're doing this procedure. And the resident texted me back. He was like, I have no idea what we're doing tomorrow. And so I was like, huh, wouldn't it be cool if, just as a thought experiment, I brought in the headset, like the Oculus, into clinic tomorrow, and I just showed him what the procedure was like. And like, lo and behold, I showed him what the procedure was like because I could cast what I was doing on the Oculus to my cell phone. And then we reversed roles. And I put the headset on the resident and I said, well, show me the procedure I just did. And we walked into the room and this resident who had never done this procedure before instantly knew how to do it. And suddenly we were, you know, like word was getting out, like, wow, like there's this thing that you can do to get really good at this very quickly. So that really got me started on this journey of like realizing, wow, the technology is actually very, very good. Before this, I didn't really have too much exposure to simulation, to the metaverse, to anything like that. I had during medical school spent a lot of time looking at various technologies because, you know, at Tufts, we have an MD MBA program, and sometimes we do these events where we bring in innovators and innovative technologies. So we had done this hackathon where we had invited a bunch of developers to work with medical students. This was approximately like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, around like 2015. And to be honest, I remember trying the Oculus then and thinking it wasn't, oh, you know, people were getting nauseous putting the headset on for even 10 minutes. It was bulky, and the software just wasn't very good. Fast forward to 2022, and you can do some really, really complex work in the metaverse. I would still say where we are, if I had to give this kind of like broad overview, where we are in the metaverse today is probably where the internet was back in 1995 with AOL. You know, like right now, there's one main access point into the metaverse, right? It is through the headset that you buy. And most people, the most consumer-friendly version of it is the Oculus. So the version of the metaverse that you see is mostly controlled by the software, the disparate software that's created by Facebook. And in fact, even to access the metaverse, you need like a Facebook profile, right? That will change, and that's going to change fairly soon as more companies are investing into their version of what they want the metaverse to be. And barriers will break down, and eventually it will become a lot closer to what we have as the internet, what we think of it today, right? Which is this space that runs between apps, where there's a browser, where you can, you know, kind of like the spaces bleed through each other. It's not quite that way yet. Again, like the way I think of it is like it's AOL, you know, there are only a very few websites that you go to. There's like a very limited amount of things to do right now in the metaverse, but that will change as I think people begin to like opt into the idea. And so what my work has been since then, so now that we had this kind of idea and this little bit of this runaway train, people start, you know, reaching out and saying, hey, you know, since you can simulate these procedures, wouldn't it be great to publish about it? You know, and so we worked really hard to basically take what we thought was a very common procedure that we do that goes back to that neurotomy procedure I was talking about, where we ablate some of the nerves that cause pain to the joints of the back, specifically the lower back. And we made a tutorial on how to do it in the metaverse. And the way that we did that was very simple. So, if you think about it, right, one of the things that sort of holds us back in medical education is you might be doing something great, some new procedure, some new technique, something very exciting. But to get it out there, you have to go through journals, or you have to, like put a lot of time and energy into figuring out how to creatively publish something. But with a 3D headset, all you have to do is click the record button, and whatever you're doing in this virtual space is recorded. So you can bypass thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of animation and design work, and simply within 30 seconds have your version of the procedure done and in your inbox ready to publish. So that's what we did. It took us a little longer than 30 seconds. It took us about 2 to 3 weeks to get the right takes. And then we had to splice the little video together. But we basically submitted this video to a couple of journals, one of which, was very keen on publishing it. And the whole concept behind the article was, how virtual reality can be used as a technology to basically teach people procedures. And since then, many folks have been reaching out and just been saying, hey, we have a new procedure that we'd like to teach in virtual reality. And so in the world of clinical medicine, which is, a little bit of a different take than, teaching year 1 and year 2 med students like basic human anatomy, what we're really talking about, or what I'm really interested in, is how do we take things that we do in the hospital every day and simulate them in a way where a person who's never done them before will feel really confident doing them, or that we increase the latency of learning, or we decrease the latency of learning, essentially, right? The first time you place a central line, which is a line that goes into a very big vein in the human body. So if you guys allow me, I'd just like to share my screen.
You should be able to do it. Okay.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
You guys can see my cat?
Yes, so cute.
Awesome. So yesterday, we actually had a really interesting case that came into the hospital. So this month, I'm working at Boston Children's, which is a very expansive and very tertiary, quaternary care facility for very sick kids. And we have a very difficult case. We have a 9-year-old girl who has a tumor that's invading her face. And it's really gotten so bad that she is requiring a lot of medication just to keep her pain in control. And so one of the things that we were considering doing, which we don't do very often, is ablating the nerve of the one of the facial nerves that comes, from the cranium through a tiny little hole in the skull base and comes out across the face. Now, this is a procedure that, I'm working with some people who have been doing this for decades and decades and decades, right? They're professors. They are extremely well published. These are arguably the world's experts in pediatric pain. And one of them reaches out to me and says, hey, I know you do this work in virtual reality simulation. I would really like to see, and consider creating a virtual reality model of this, just because I maybe have done this procedure once in my entire career. And before we go into the operating room, before we try and find this nerve and ablate this nerve in this person who is going to have very distorted anatomy, and, we're going to need to do this, we only have really one shot at doing this. I want to see if I can simulate the procedure. So yesterday, I started building him a little model, right? So there's, we're considering, okay, I need to hit the pteropalatine fossa Do I go above the zygomatic arch? Do I go below the zygomatic arch? I pull the skull to the other side where the zygomatic arch has been removed. We see the little fossa. And now I'm beginning to think in the back of my head, okay, how do I move this machine, this fluoroscopy machine, so I can see that little hole as clearly as I want to see it, right? And so in the back of my mind, even though this feels like a video game, I'm already thinking in my head, okay, this is caudal, 50 degrees, and oblique maybe 45 degrees, right? And I'm looking at the other side, I'm like, okay, I can walk around in this space. I can put the pointers exactly how, and really by recording this, I'm really practicing the procedure. And then I'm looking at it from the other side standpoint, and I'm like, okay, is this really where the nerve is coming out of? I just want to check myself, And it turns out I'm wrong. It's actually the whole a little bit higher up, right? And so it's these kind of thought exercises that
setting that to basically put that out there so that people can actually see what I do when I do these simple procedures. Logistically, I was thinking about.
Yeah. So I mean, logistically, it's not actually very difficult. You basically can go about it a couple of different ways. You can purchase the modeling software, and basically either through a computer or through the headset, simply tell the machine to start recording as you are dissecting through layers. So like the one I showed you is probably the most bare bone version of it, right? But there are models where you have all the trigeminal nerves already built in, right? You have muscle layers that you can go through. You can show like layer by layer, this is how I do the surgery, this is where I'm going, this is the goal here. You can even draw in 3D. And so all of these tools are actually out there. The beauty is, it's like lights, camera, action at this point, right? The only thing I'll say logistically is that it doesn't record voice yet. So you'll have to create an audio layover. But that's such a simple thing to do. In the paper we wrote up for basically lumbosacral radiofrequency neurotomy, it took us maybe, like we were really doing it for the first time. So it took us maybe like a couple of hours of doing things over and over and over and recording them. But, the technology is pretty good at this point. It's like pretty ready to do.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, the next step is actually doing things in real time. Like, for instance, not going through like a database of the anatomy of the head and neck, but actually going through the actual CT scan of the actual patient.
Yes.
That's
yeah.
going to be the next level of doing
and
things in real life.
Exactly. There are a couple of companies that are actually working on that right now. So one of the companies that creates a lot of the anatomy modeling software, right? Their goal by 2023 is to have a model that correlates really well with like a normal CT or MRI. So say you were looking at what I just showed you, right? And you want to see, okay, this is the pointer, this is where we are. What does it look like on an axial T2 head and neck, like skull base scan, right? Like they're actually building that right now. They just built an ultrasound model where like you basically can use your controller like an ultrasound. They create a human body. You put the ultrasound of the human body in front of you, looks exactly like what it would look like on an ultrasound machine. And you can play with the gain and depth. So like people are out there, and they're really building these tools very quickly, because I think everyone knows like to buy an ultrasound simulator is like a $15,000 proposition. This is like a $200 headset with every model you could possibly need on there. in a basic, financial standpoint, it makes a ton of sense to invest in, it's like what Tesla says, right? Like you're not buying the car for the car, you're buying the car for the software updates. In the same way, this is like a platform, which is only going to continuously get better.
Thank you.
Hey, Rohan. Hi, this is Sanjay Goyal. Had a question. I'm not a doctor or any kind of medical guy. I'm more interested in the technology side of things. But question, I am a little confused between like virtual reality simulations and the metaverse environment. Like the video that Amani and Syra showed more like your avatar like interacting with other avatars in a virtual world. But from what like you were showing on that little recording of the skull there, it looked more of like just a virtual reality type of interactive viewing of the skull. So could you possibly explain maybe what's the difference between what you showed and what the metaverse environment is, and a little bit, if you understand?
Yeah,
that?
sure. So my understanding of it, right, is the metaverse is the internet sort of actualized in 3D. So in the version that I showed you, right, it's me kind of interacting with a model. Where we take that to the next level is, and the technology actually allows for this today. There's just not enough, for the purposes of this like logistical show, I'd not do this part of it. But say, I'm here and my attending who's also doing the procedure wants to be in that same room, right? We both want to interact with the model at the same time. We actually can do that. The software allows you to basically create essentially a private anatomy room. Different people with the software can all come into that space. We don't, the idea being that if I wanted to teach this procedure to someone in Illinois, I could very easily do that if we all had the headset and the technology. And so that's really the more metaverse oriented idea, right? Which is when we start sharing these spaces. And that's when, it becomes a classroom as opposed to just a canvas.
Gotcha. Okay, I understand that a little bit better. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Jotwani. So that was a really informative talk about all the different medical aspects and how we can use the metaverse surgically. Now we're going to transition into Dr. Hyderi's talk on how to use metaverse in the medical school curriculum for even year 1 and 2 medical students, all the way up to where you're at with surgery.
And then we can open it up for Q&As at the end as well.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Amani and Syra. It's really a pleasure to be here and being in transparency. My nieces, it's really amazing to see you all grown up and being all professional and grown up. So first thing is when I was asked to kind of give some comments, I had to be clear it was about the metaverse, not the multiverse. For those who aren't following that, it's a little Marvel reference. So go check out Doctor Strange and Spidey and everyone else who are kind of doing similar things. Actually, it's just an alternate universe rather than an extended reality, which is what Dr. Jotwani spoke to. So this is about mentorship. You mentioned that earlier, so I'll very briefly, because I know there's some teenagers, even younger people on the call, so you don't lose them too much with the wonky stuff, on a pathway to get to something like being a doctor or a doctor interested in technology and education. After Harvard, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be in a community, working in a kind of community health setting, or even be a doctor, frankly, and went to India and did a fellowship and started working with poor villagers in India. And that's what led me to be interested in medicine. After that, had to pick a specialty, right, to figure out what you want to do. And so I chose a broad specialty in family medicine, but also trained in preventive medicine, which is how you manage populations, how you manage communities rather than just individual patients. Tied into that is access and equity. So how do you actually bring resources to those patients and communities, but also I would say to learners. And I actually think there's a large impact in the possibility of the use of metaverse to bring education and skills to people rather than having to come to, let's say, a school or a campus, as Dr. Jotwani was speaking to Sanjay's question. So why did I leave UIC? It was a once in a lifetime opportunity. So all my 6 siblings and my mom are all in Chicago, but it was a Kaiser Permanente Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine. I felt was a once in a lifetime opportunity to go to a place with a special, bold, unique mission, vision, and values, and also resources that could help actually implement it. By that, I mean money, By that, I mean people who are interested in entrepreneurship and bright new ideas and not doing things the same way. So interestingly, when I accepted this job in July of 2018, so I'll bring you up to speed pretty quickly, the building had already been designed to not have any cadavers. So there already was a strategic emphasis on the role of technology, including, in fact, being the early beta testers for HoloLens for medical schools. So we did an environmental scan and visited schools, including Case Western. They were on the list along with the University of Colorado and others. And so we got a chance as a new school, rather than refining old stuff, to build it from the ground up. And I'll show you in a couple of minutes just our approach to anatomy instruction, which also includes virtual reality. But I kind of wanted to mention a little bit of that background so you kind of know what I walked into. A couple other brief comments. Dr. Jotwani mentioned this old school we called Sodoto, see one, do one, teach one, has completely fallen out of favor. Some of you also have heard and play sports or in other things and say practice makes perfect. I would say that's completely false. It's practice with feedback and coaching makes perfect. And so that's part of the issue with the metaverse and other technology-enabled instruction is how do you create that opportunity for feedback and coaching woven into the technology, because not technology on its own. And I think that's an important point. I will say as a medical educator, and one of our lessons learned, and I'll talk about our lived experience here at Kaiser Permanente. Our approach to anatomy is not discipline-based, nor the rest of our curriculums. We integrated histology, which is microanatomy, anatomy, pathology, which is dysfunction, right, of tissues, and also radiology, all from the beginning from week 1 of medical school. And I'll give you a highlight of that in just a minute. And so beyond that, we had to have kind of a fun name, of course. So we're called Anatomy Beyond Cadavers, or ABC. Okay, fantastic. It took a little delay on my end. So briefly, this is right from our school's website. So if you look here, essentially our approach to anatomy, first of all, is technology enabled. It's not full metaverse, meaning not all extended reality. So I'll speak you through just these couple bullets very quickly. We do have dried, essentially specimens, what we call plastinates, which have various parts of the body, et cetera, that are housed in our Anatomy Resource Center, or the ARC. So that's kind of the scaffold or the basis. However, we also have added the HoloLens-based augmented reality. We are launching, after some pilots in the last year or two, fully this coming summer in July. In addition, though, I mentioned earlier, and this is very important, for board exams, which are licensure exams, and for learning, all of these disparate curricula. So anatomy and 3D stuff is one thing, but for medicine, you have to know from the cellular level to the tissue level and then function. So we've integrated in these tables, which you'll see in the video, that have a combination of imaging, CT scan, MRI, pathology slides, histology slides, et cetera, all in one workstation. In addition, as a complement, if you will, the other in many specialties, including in my own, in family medicine, emergency medicine, et cetera. So we train all of our students in point of care ultrasound from year 1 through year 4. So that's a handheld small ultrasound that we do ultrasound techniques. That's my lights going off, telling me to stand up and not be sitting for too long. So hopefully these lights will go back on. See, technology, love it or leave it. And we're gonna love it. So beyond that, I'm gonna go ahead and show you now the first couple of minutes from this video. I hope the sound quality will be okay.
Our approach to anatomy instruction here at the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine is going to be distributive and multimodal. And what that means is we're going to use a variety of technologies, such as physical specimens of actual human cadavers that have been preserved by plastination, as well as virtual reality, augmented reality, and diagnostic imaging. And distributive in that it will be implemented throughout the curriculum. Learners will have a beginning course to introduce anatomic nomenclature and planes of dissection, but they will then learn the anatomy as the curriculum progresses. And what this will allow is to present to them the pertinent facts that can be applied to the relevant systems that they are studying. Students are presented with clinical cases that they need to then explore and find out the relevant anatomy that they need to solve these problems. They also need to research concepts from other foundational sciences and be able to then use them together to tackle problems. What this allows is application of these different sciences in an integrated fashion that ultimately results in better clinical reasoning when they are practicing the sessions. We will be utilizing multiple technologies that incorporate anatomical images in 2 and 3 dimensions with actual physical specimens of the human body. Our students will manipulate virtual models obtained from human cadavers, and they will be able to virtually dissect and inspect them in any of the cross-sectional planes used for diagnostic imaging. Students today are extremely comfortable with technology. Utilizing these approaches not only enhances the retention and application of anatomical concepts, but also makes learning actually a lot of fun. Incorporation of these resources allows our students to learn quite challenging anatomical concepts, particularly related to the appearance and relationships of anatomical structures in diagnostic imaging. Our students will learn anatomy that supports the learning of the other biomedical and clinical sciences, and that is clinically relevant to their medical practice.
Hello, I'm Dr.
All right. So hopefully you'll back off a video and whatnot. I'll close by saying one thing. I think you've heard a lot of us say this is emergent technology, and it is. And it's also an emergent approach to education. One of the things as a medical education scholar and researcher that we're working on is evaluating the impact and dissemination and feasibility of doing this elsewhere. We're looking at issues of effectiveness, right? We're looking at issues of scalability. We're actually issues of cost as well. So we'll likely be partnering with sister institutions like CASE and others to kind of see if we can actually achieve our mission of having impact on medical education and helping transform it. So thanks so much. And I'll hand off back to the Saira and Amani.
Thanks so much, Dr. Hyderi. That was really informative, and I'd love to hear your take on everything. It was good to hear multiple perspectives on the topic. So now we're just going to move on to a general Q&A. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute and ask, and you can either say it in the chat or unmute.
If not, we also have some questions prepared.
I have a question.
Okay, yeah.
I was just wondering, and this is both to Dr. Jotwani as well as to Dr. Hyderi. I'm also a physician, I'm an ophthalmologist, but I wanted to find out what are some of the challenges in trying to bring Metaverse to a more publicly widely used forefront. Like, how about, like, I know some of the stuff may have been addressed, but where, how do you see this expanding? What are some of the challenges that we might be faced with?
Well, I think right off the bat, I'll tell you that as so many people, in this call are physicians themselves, we might have some inherent notion or understanding that medical education tends to really lag behind, and medicine in general tends to very much lag behind in the technology sector, right? Like, for example, I was looking to publish just one video in virtual reality. And I found only one journal in the world of anesthesiology that would publish a video. So we're still like at that level where a lot of journals don't know how to disseminate video content on their websites. And there's not a lot of slack space in the world of clinical medicine to kind of grow with these technologies. It's really, we're still trying to figure out how to use mobile apps. And you can argue that other industries have been much faster to adopt these type of technologies than medicine. Now, fortunately, you have a lot of folks who are very, very dedicated, who are looking to build these curriculums from the ground up, a lot of new medical schools that are looking to basically tear down everything and build things the way they should be from the get-go. And the question is, how long will it take for all the rest of these places to kind of catch up? You know, so that's kind of one of that's one of the things I think about a lot, which is, you know, you definitely have the evangelists, you have the people who are trying to get this new technology out into the world, but you're often fighting the rest of medicine, which is, you know, looking to do things the very traditional way, you know.
I echo that completely. I'll just add, I think the onus is on us who are interested in this to do well-designed studies that then can actually get into the peer-reviewed publications, et cetera. But it's somewhat so new that I think some people view it as this shiny new car or shiny new toy, rather than actually something that actually is formidable. But to the point that someone made that, you know, maybe the internet in the 1990s was evaluated similarly, I think we are on the cusp of something that we're all going to have to lean in who are interested in this innovation and bring scholarship to the table to really disseminate it and actually prove ROI. I will say this is seemingly helpful. There's not that many studies on it. So I take it on as a challenge and an opportunity, but I do think we need to demonstrate that worth.
I wanted to thank Dr. Jotwani and Dr. Hyderi covering both the physician and the student perspective. I wanted to ask from a patient perspective, the other part of the puzzle. As a patient, I'm not a doctor, married to one, but fortunately have not had many procedures, but I know as you get older, you are due for certain elective procedures. A lot of them cause someone to be nervous walking in. Do you think the metaverse could help abate that nervousness in terms of, in two ways? One, the onboarding, you know, where do I even go when I get to the hospital? I have no idea. Such a huge, like you just mentioned, Boston Children's. That would be such a massive place to even walk through, to find where I'm supposed to even, what floor, where's the parking lot. To the other side, the procedure itself. What are they actually doing? I'm just curious from a clinical or practitioner and an educator point of view, how you think that could help improve bedside manner, how that could help improve the patient experience. You know, having that virtual immersive experience before I even get to the hospital tomorrow.
Yeah, so I mean, we didn't even touch upon the patient-facing side of you know, what we can consider to be everything from, you're right, onboarding a patient and making them feel like they're more prepared for, you know, their perioperative journey. To, I mean, you know, there are places out there, various departments of anesthesia that are experimenting with using virtual reality to help with, you know, procedures. So for example, you know, we torture people, you know, doing nerve blocks and epidurals and kind of all these procedures at the bedside, even IV placements. Wouldn't it be great to just allow someone to be in a meadow far, far away? So one of the projects that's going on here right now that they've just received funding for at Brigham is there's a new type of headset out there that has an adapter for smell. And the idea is that, you know, with smell, you actually increase the depth of the experience that folks are having. So it's not just imagery, 360, it's not just sound, but when you really add that smell, and I've had a chance to use it, they can simulate what it really feels like to be in a meadow. And at that point, can you decrease the anxiety associated with so many things that we do in a hospital? So yeah, I mean, you know, to Dr. Hyderi's point, people, you know, in our world won't believe it until they see a really good randomized controlled trial. But there is a lot of reason to believe that the patient experience can be really improved upon with virtual reality, because think about it, hospitals are not a fun place to be. They're inherently scary. They're inherently isolating. You know, there's just so much about the patient experience which just sucks from get-go. And the beautiful thing about virtual reality, if none of you have had a chance to do this, I highly recommend it. The other day, I put on the headset and I watched what it would be like to be at the International Space Station. And I have to say, I've watched movies about space ever since I was like a year old. You know, I've seen it, I thought, in IMAX, in every condition I could have watched space, I have watched it. But this was the first time I felt like I was actually in space. And so the work that Meta is doing right now with SpaceX and a couple of studios where they really capture these high fidelity images, you know, like this technology is actually really growing at a faster pace than I think anybody realizes. It's only a matter of time before people put two and two together and say, you know, if you can transport somebody to space in their apartment, why can't you take them to a better place when they're having the worst time, you know, at the hospital? So there's a ton of patient experience oriented stuff. I just think, you know, we're just beginning to even tap into that.
And then I also see a question in the chat. Shella Goyle is interested in knowing more about how about the software and how it works and how we can play with the software and see its potential.
Oh, that's such a great question. Dr. Dara, you probably interface with so many of the vendors, and you probably have even a greater sense of like who's out there building the software. So I'll let you take this one.
I can start, but I will say the audience, the context we're working with is medical students. So it's very specific for that setting rather than the lay public. So that Shella's asking about how could they as lay people get access to this technology and use it. So interestingly, I have no interface on that front. So if you do have some, I mean, I know one of my family members recently got a headset, but I think it was part of a program with orthopedic kind of work or whatever. So still a medical context. So if anyone else, yourself included, has info on the lay public accessing it, I welcome it.
Well, one really easy thing, I mean, I don't know how many folks know about this, but there is actually, there's a Google for 3D art. It's called SketchyFab. So if you go onto Google right now and you sketch SketchyFab, it is basically an online repository of digital 3D art. So say, for example, like the premise of all things metaverse is that it's not like your typical software design. It's actually mostly game design. It's most of the people who are creating these virtual spaces are video game people because they understand how to create 3D spaces, right? They've been creating these really complex 3D spaces for Call of Duty for years and years and years and years. Now there's just this other opportunity. And that's actually one of the big holdups in the metaverse is that, you know, is that there just aren't enough game designers, right? Like Meta has difficulty hiring enough game designers to build in what they call Unity. And so, you know, basically, if you go to SketchyFab, you'll see that there are people out there right now. Just put in a random thing, right? Like somebody on this call is an ophthalmologist. Put in eyeball and see how many people out there have built 3D models of eyeballs that you can play with on your computer screen. But if you have a headset, even if you want to use, like, you know, you can buy a $15 to $30 cardboard on Amazon where you can turn your phone into the 360 experience. Just put your phone into the cardboard. And those are very simple ways to start playing with the software and hardware. To get more involved into it, you know, the sort of the consumer price point for this is probably the Oculus, but their level is even higher than that, right? So HTC came out with the Focus 3. One of the real nice things about the Focus 3 is that it has enough processing power that you don't need a computer. So some of the things that some of the software is so powerful, requires so much processing that no headset alone can really fathom that amount of computer processing. You need a physical computer. And that itself has also been a very limiting part of virtual reality. But some of these headsets are getting so good that they can do computer processing without a computer. So HTC just built one. And so, you know, obviously figure out where you might want to be in the price point of this. But if you know, if your budget's $15 or if it's $1,500, there is a way for you to interact with the software, which I think is a really democratic or egalitarian way that VR has sort of developed over these past few years.
Yeah, thank you.
I was, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, what's interesting is in the metaverse, just like Dr. Jotwani mentioned, there's not much out there, not much publications in the space, right? So whoever is the expert, it flips the pyramid. The assumption is in medicine, someone who has 20 years of practical experience is at the top of the pyramid and provides the latest cutting edge research and so on. It goes down all the way to the med students at the base of the pyramid. In the metaverse, it's an equalizer. Anyone can build that model. Anyone can learn how to do this. So you might be surprised to find that a 12-year-old who's familiar with Roblox can navigate flawlessly through the metaverse and actually provide the instruction how to navigate and how to get started. So what we found in corporate America, sometimes we have to use reverse mentoring, where it's no longer the people who've been working 30 years. It's really getting the students like yourself who have more familiarity with the technology and would be teaching us how to navigate and eventually lead us to better solutions. So I don't always think it's the people with the white hair that have the answers. It could be somebody who's much, much younger, who's more familiar with the technology and the tools to be your Sherpa, if you will.
Thank you all for these responses. And in the chat, we put the Sketchy Fab website in there, as well as some other resources. I saw that Mr. Vikar Saidi also put DeepMind in there, which is the world's leading AI company. And he is actually somewhat of an expert in the AI field, as he wrote a book called The Genome Affair about it. If anyone is interested, you could read up on that or ask any other questions about that as well.
I had one last question for the two panelists. What are ways that students who are interested in getting involved in the metaverse, how would you encourage them to get started beyond just purchasing the Oculus? Are there any communities, any way, any forums where they could engage other medical students or other college students who are entering the space to kind of collaborate and learn from each other? Or is it truly white space where they would have to kind of build it on their own and make those connections?
Oh, I don't think there's white space, Osman. I think that there's, so, it's kind of funny, right? We talk about like the different trajectories that it takes to get into medicine. And I think for a long time, people have like sort of considered that the obvious way to get into medicine is to do like shadowing, some volunteering work, some research work, yada, 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 and this and that. But the incredible thing about like this technology that's being built, right, is that like a lot of the folks have this, I'm thinking back to like when I was a 15-year-old, right? If somebody had told me, listen, there's this incredible potential to change medicine by basically building video games and creating virtual spaces, and you at this age can like learn some of those things and help build this stuff, right? It doesn't even have to be complicated, like simple programs, right? Like, I'm imagining in the back of my mind, like there's just so much work that needs to be done. You can build a simple program that helps, like you said, Osman, helps a hospital basically explain how to get from the front door to the preoperative space, right? Like that is not a huge project to do. It's actually potentially a relatively simple project to build. But if you try and get a bunch of people who have never done it before and who are like kind of not very plastic and learning new skills, it would be tough. But for a 15-year-old that can like is very technology savvy, that's not a huge project to do. So just like that, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects to think about bringing new patient or medical education facing technologies into this world. The sort of barrier to access is maybe learning some game design, learning some Unity. But the incredible thing is, if you look at, the folks who are applying to college right now, a lot of them are doing that, right? A lot of them, a big movement right now amongst high school students, it started off in sort of the college realm, but now it's really bleeding into the high school space, are these hackathons, right? So, young people who are, ages like 10 and up are spending time meeting people both at the university level and maybe at the levels below, like their own peers, building cool things over, weekends, and then trying to get those things off the ground. And they're happening at every state, at every university, every weekend, right? There's even a group called Major League Hacking, MLH, which hosts these events. Like there used to be like one big event every weekend. Now there are like 30 events every weekend, right? Like and they accept people of all kinds, right? You can't code a single line in Python. That's great. You can still show up and they'll teach you how like to do it through beginner classes. And so this world is like growing and growing, and it's the young folks who are going to get these skills early on that are going to like build the really important things. So yeah, you as a 15-year-old, if you gain the skills and you can build in Unity, can build a medical application probably better than somebody like I could, right? Like my best brain years are theoretically behind me at this point. I can play around with needles, but I'm not going to build anything crazy in Unity anymore. So I think that there are incredible ideas out there that and the folks who are out there who are really motivated, it's like it's totally up for grabs.
Thank you for that wonderful insight. So I think Mr. Vicar Sayedi wanted to say one comment before we close out here. So Mr. Sayedi, whenever you're ready.
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Saira and Amani, for your leadership on this kind of endeavor. It's really, really impressive. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Jotwani and Dr. Hyderi for these very, very interesting presentations. I'm a person who's been involved in AI for decades, but there's always so much more to learn. There's just, once you just go down deep in one area, there's just so much. But I think just the one comment I wanted to make was, regarding AI and the life sciences, I think there's a lot of time, a feeling that, as was expressed earlier, how much shortage there is of healthcare professionals and the forecast for that. And with that in mind, it's so important to develop AI in these areas. And so we're seeing that. I think one of the really, really exciting areas I saw recently was, we've mapped the human genome. It took about 13 years to do it. And that was done, I think, finished around 2002. And since then, we understand about only 2% of the base pairs out of 3 billion base pairs in the human genome, and just beyond human capacity to do this. But once you introduce AI, AI's, brain, you could say, operates today about 1 million times faster than the human brain, and its capacity for, looking at data is, from the human perspective, infinite. Its scale of data that it can look at. So for us to understand the genome, to understand what are these other base pairs doing, are they involved in a regulatory function in some capacity, or are they involved in gene expression? What exactly are these things doing? It will be AI that gives us that solution. I think AI on its own has identified a new antibiotic after looking at millions and millions of potential compounds. But the most extraordinary thing AI has done so far was, and I think this is in the entire field of AI, was it was able to, using a technology called AlphaFold, was able to determine or to solve a more than 50-year-old problem in structural biology, which was, how do you determine the three-dimensional folding pattern of a protein? And that's really critical, because if you can understand that, then you can understand how to disintermediate that protein with a chemical compound. And coming from pharma, we spend years and years and years trying to understand that folding pattern. And now AlphaFold from DeepMind in the UK has, with in excess of 90% accuracy, can predict the folding patterns of proteins now, which means that you have a very sort of accelerated pathway to drug development now, which is truly an extraordinary contribution. And I think this is something really, really unique, because now you have potentially a Nobel Prize worthy achievement done by AI. So that's really, really something extraordinary. I just wanted to share with you all, but thank you all very much for an extraordinary presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That was just really amazing to hear. And as we've kind of hit the 1 hour mark, I think that we're going to close. So I want to say a special thank you to Dr. Jotwani, Dr. Hyderi, and Mr. Osman Khan for joining us and taking up the time to speak today. And this was really informative. So I'm going to post the recording of this meeting on my mentorship website. It's medicinementorship.org, which we will put in the chat. But other than that, thank you everyone for coming and joining, and we hope you have a great night.
Thanks so much, guys, for hosting this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone. Thanks again.